Hi, everyone. Welcome. On behalf of the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism, or IOR, at Utah State University, we welcome you to the 5th of 9 sessions on the Red Emerald Resilience Training Program. I am Danya Amori. I'm the director of the Wallace Stegner Center's Environmental Dispute Resolution Program, which is based at the University of Utah, and I am an IOR partner and will be facilitating today's session. To start us off, we want to highlight that this training series is supported by the Utah Office of Tourism's Destination Development and Partner Relations team. And we want to give you a little background about the Red Emerald Resilience Training Series. As many of you know, probably all too well, the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in serious economic setbacks and challenges for the tourism industry in many destination communities throughout Utah and the Mountain West and across the nation. Many businesses and tourism organizations are still recovering and or learning how to adapt in this post-pandemic world. To address this need, the Utah Office of Tourism and IOR came together to build this webinar training series with the purpose of helping Utah's tourism industry and local businesses recover from COVID-19 and become more resilient to future shocks. We consulted with industry leaders and business owners throughout the state via interviews and a survey, and we used what we heard via that consultation to inform the creation of this series. The topics and design of the training series reflect what we heard was most important. Our ultimate hope in conducting this training series is that through sharing best practices, strategies, lessons learned, and success stories, we can help Utah's tourism industry and businesses thrive in an ever-changing world. For the full training series program, you can check out our website. I'm going to put a link to that into the chat for everyone. So you should have that there in the chat. This training series is organized into 3 segments. The first segment focused on communication for resilience. The second segment focuses on resources for resilience. And the third will be on planning for resilience. Today's session is the second in our series on resources for resilience, and we'll focus on tools and resources to better understand tourism trends and spending patterns in your community. As with all of our sessions, this session is particularly targeted towards people working in and with the tourism industry. However, we expect that today's content will be relevant for anyone with an interest in this topic. Today, we are joined by 3 special guests who will be discussing this topic and sharing their wisdom. Denise Jordan, who is a marketing analytics and research manager for the Utah Office of Tourism. Jennifer Lever, who is a senior research analyst at the Gardner Policy Institute, which is based at the University of Utah. And Jonathan Smithgall, who is Vice President of Digital Marketing and Media for Love Communications. Each of our speakers brings a unique perspective and extensive experience working with the tourism industry. Our speakers will join us in a moment. For now, I just want to say thank you to them for joining us to share their wisdom. For the audience, a few important things to note about today's webinar. First, this session is being recorded. We will share the session recording along with a webinar summary via our website after the event. In a moment, we are going to jump into the interactive presentations. Throughout the session, those of you who are here on our live webinar should expect to engage. We really want to hear from you as well as having you hear from our speakers. So we're going to ask you some questions, and we would like for you to respond to those via the chat function of Zoom so we can get some feedback from you. We will also take your questions to the speakers, but we will handle that via the Q&A function. So just to run through the mechanics, and we want to hear from you. So we're going to present you some questions via the chat function. And we are going to have you put your questions to the panelists in the Q&A function. And you should see buttons for both of those at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So again, use the Q&A function for your questions to the panelists. Use the chat function to respond to our questions to you. Let's give that a try. And we want to hear a little bit from our audience. So I'm going to ask everybody to open the chat function. You can click on the chat button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. You should see a chat screen open to the right-hand side of your Zoom screen. I'm going to ask you to make sure that your chats are going to everyone, so the panelists and all of the people on the webinar can see what you're saying. So make sure you're set up that way in chat. And the first question to you via the chat function, I'll give you a little time to respond to this, is just how well do you feel you understand tourism trends and spending patterns in your community? So take a moment, think about that. When you're ready, type your response into the chat function, and you can hit enter and just make sure that's going to everyone so we can all see what people have to say about that question. See some responses coming in. Looks like we're already getting kind of a range of different levels of understanding, which is what we expected, and I think very normal. Hopefully there's something for everybody in this webinar today. Seeing some feel they understand it very well, some understand tourism trends, but not spending patterns, not well at all. And I'll give just another moment for some of those to come in. For those of you on the webinar, I encourage you to look through the chat, see what people are saying. Maybe about 10 more seconds to get some answers entered into the chat. It's also nice just to see who is here on the webinar. All right, hopefully that gave everybody who wanted to respond a chance to put something in the chat. And we'd love to hear from you. It gives the panelists something to respond to. Some people just don't know. Well, they understand the trends, totally understandable. Okay, so next question to you all. What is one thing you're hoping to get out of today's webinar? This is a great question to respond to because it can help us make sure to meet your needs to the best of our abilities. So again, take a moment, think about that. When you're ready, type your response into chat. Hit enter whenever you're ready to submit that. And I'll give you just about 30 seconds to do that. So while these chat responses are coming in, I'll just encourage our panelists to kind of scroll through the chat, see if anything sparks some ideas for you, if something you might want to address during your presentation or during our discussion. From the responses that are coming in, just seeing a desire for better understanding of tools and resources, get a sense of what's going on here across Utah. I think a lot of what we'll cover is relevant beyond Utah, and there will be a bit of a Utah focus. Latest trends, destination planning, development management. For anyone interested in that topic, I encourage you to join our next session, August 2nd. It's going to talk a lot about those related topics. Okay, lots of stuff there. Again, if you have other things you want to enter, please do. We're going to start to roll into our presentation. Thank you again for providing some input to kick off our conversation. So what everybody on the call knows what to expect. Today's presentation has been jointly prepared by our speakers. So they are going to kind of deliver tag team. They're going to just roll through back to back. So I'll have Denise Jordan join us in a moment, and then she'll just roll right into our other speakers. We plan to leave some time for Q&A at the end. So again, just a reminder, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit any questions to the speakers or things you'd love for them to talk about. Things going as planned, we'll have a little time for Q&A at the end of our session. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our panelists. And again, Denise, I'm going to have you kick us off. I'll have you turn your video on, and I'll let you say a little bit more about yourself to kick off your presentation. Oh, looks like we might have a little slide thing going on there. You are, Denise. Great.
I couldn't find my buttons once I shared my screen. So let me just do this in the opposite order.
The joys of technology. Okay, Denise, you're on.
Okay, thank you so much, Danya, and thank you everyone for joining today. As Danya mentioned, I am the Marketing Analytics and Research Manager for the Utah Office of Tourism. And we have a lot of wonderful partners around the state, and I'm fortunate today to be joined by two other panelists who are some of those partners, in addition to IOR and the USU group. So thanks, everyone. I thought it would help if we started off by framing some of what the Utah Office of Tourism strategy is, and hopefully a lot of you are familiar with the Red Emerald Strategic Plan. It is our North Star and how we're watching tourism around the state and guiding our office's efforts and how we measure ourselves and those efforts. So these first three bullets here are imperatives that roll up to that Red Emerald Strategic Plan. I think a lot of destinations are looking at similar things, not necessarily just focusing in on a high-level economic impact number or how taxes are contributing to an area, but really understanding what quality visitation looks like and encouraging visitors to stay longer and engage more deeply in the community, spend more money, participate in more activities, things that bring that quality visitation up. We're also watching the distribution of visitation, whether that's around the state or if we're trying to distribute visitation seasonally, or maybe by day of week or time of day. But that is another one of our office imperatives. And then today we're really leaning into community efforts and helping communities understand what resources they might have available to them. But just a reminder that that is an important element of our Red Emerald strategic plan, and leaning into community-led visitor readiness, letting the community work to decide what sort of visitor economy they're desiring to have, and our office trying to support that through our destination development and management team. And then finally, this last bullet is from our Forever Mighty initiative, which I hope a lot of you are also familiar with, and that is more of our consumer-facing manifestation of our Red Emerald strategic plan, and helping visitors understand how to interact in the community and be respectful and responsible to the people and the assets when they're visiting. So just a general framework. So today, this is a crazy slide. I wanted to just show this to demonstrate how many different data sources our office is looking at together with our partners to understand what is happening around the state and in different communities. Not all of these are free and available to the public, but many of them are. And a lot of these data sources didn't exist 10 years ago. And so I think just thanks to technology and thanks to the resources that we have available to us, we are really able to use a lot of information to help guide our efforts and understand how we're doing. So today we want to focus on a few elements, talk a little bit about resident sentiment study that we recently undertook, show you some of the resources that are available on the travel.utah.gov site. Jennifer from Gardner is going to talk about some policy and economic resources, and then Jonathan is going to share some other resources from a media perspective and talk a little bit about some of the items that they offer in some of our public meetings. So to get started, I wanted to talk to you about the resident sentiment survey that we recently undertook. And so we did a survey. We took a statewide snapshot of how residents feel about tourism in the state. And then we also broke that down into 14 different areas or communities, some that are more heavily impacted by tourism than others. But this top level metric here, where 59% of statewide residents said that the positive effects do outweigh negative effects when you're considering tourism in your community. That's a number that our office is watching and measuring as we're looking at that community-led development and also some of our Forever Mighty initiatives. Now, if you look into different communities, you would see that that number varies greatly. And so we also want to understand how different communities feel about that number, where you might see 22% only saying that the positive outweighs the negative, or up to 80% in some circumstances. And then just a couple more items from that survey. Almost 70% do agree that natural resource protection and tourism can be compatible. And then back to the community part, where 81% think that the state office, the Utah Office of Tourism, should be leaning in and supporting those local efforts within the community. So this is some information that I want to point out to everyone that's available for free. It's curated exportable information that's available on our industry website. If you go to travel.utah.gov, research, and then into these travel metrics, I think you can see my cursor here, but so this is what the data dashboard looks like. And then over here on the right to the second arrow is all of the sources that you can see. So we are capturing occupancy, average daily rate, RevPAR numbers for hotel lodging, and that's revenue per available room. You can see some of the tourism tax information that we're offering with county TRT, resort community tax, car rental information, or car rental tax information, restaurant. We do share international spending and visits information. That's something we only receive once a year, and that the 2021 information should be available within the next week or two. So I encourage you to watch for that. And then we are bringing state park and national park and monument information in with visitor information in there. So you have this all in one place, airport information, M-planed and D-planed passengers. And then also on that site, in a link below those dashboards, you can find a report that we have produced every year. And I call this kind of the who, what, when, where, why, how report. It offers a little bit of everything, telling you who is visiting, their origin markets, why they're coming here, what sort of places they're visiting while they're here, what their demographics are. You can also see some of their niche activities that they're participating in, and maybe understand a little bit more about what you might expect someone to spend while they're in market, participating in those different activities, and then a little bit of information too about satisfaction and intent to travel. So back to the public dashboards, I thought it would be a good exercise to just show you a way that I use that information, and that you could also use that information in your own community. We did take a recent look at how our winter in Southern Utah efforts were affecting visitation and outcomes for tourism's effects. And so this is national park visitation, looking at November through February timelines over time. This green and yellow are 2021 and 2022 numbers. And so you can see those winter numbers have been increasing. And then we took a look at what that total share is relative to annual fiscal year national park visitation. And you can see that the share of visitation has increased over time from about 10%, almost 15% during those winter months. Then we overlaid the occupancy information that we're also sharing on that site, and looked at the different occupancy numbers in some of the gateway counties in those areas. So you can see this yellow line here, looking at occupancy November through February, and how it's performing over time and through our efforts with the Winter in Southern Utah campaign. We also took a look at how the county TRT tax collection, that's the transient room tax collection in the different counties, is trending over time, and the winter share of what that looks like annually. And you can see it has gone from about 17 up to 23% in 2020, which I think was, a function of pandemic, but still remaining high through 2021 and up to almost 20%. So you can find all of that on those dashboards that I mentioned. And now I'm going to turn the time over to Jennifer, so you can hear about the Policy Institute and economic perspective from her.
Hi, thanks, Denise. Appreciate that. So yeah, I'm Jennifer. Many of you know I am the state tourism analyst. I work at the Gardner Policy Institute. And today I just want to introduce you to the wealth of information that we have on our website, particularly county-specific information, our county profiles. So this is our homepage for our website. I put the link up in the left corner. And if you pull up the main page, you can see economics and public policy, and there will be a drop-down list which basically has a whole bunch of different options. And so you would go to travel and tourism, and that's basically where you're going to find everything. And that's what I'm going to show you a little bit about today. So you open that travel and tourism link, you can see the county tourism dashboard. So go ahead and we're going to start clicking on that. And before I show you the actual dashboard, I wanted to show you the tourism county profiles. And I want to point out that these are one-page double-sided profiles. The PDF versions for every county are found here. And so I'm just showing you where to find them with this. You click this link. And so the first page of the two-sided document highlights each county's visitor spending and jobs. And next slide. This is a close-up look at the data that we collect and present. And I just want to mention a lot of what we do at the Gardner Institute is consolidate data and put it out there in a form that's hopefully easy to understand and hopefully useful. When Denise showed that really busy slide with all of our data sources, we use a lot of those sources, take the information in, and then try to put it out there to everyone. So here's a look at, I think this is Grand County. You can see the visitor spending by type of spending. So you can see how it's broken down in each county. Auto transportation, food service, groceries, it's going to look different in every county. And then we also like to point out the share. So the statewide visitor spending, what is your county's share of that spending? So kind of get that perspective. Which, these profiles are really good to use as a tool to take to a local, like a county board meeting. If you're trying to justify, some funding for some tourism related projects, or to show, how significant tourism is in your county. These hard copies are great to take and show to county, local county members. And then also we take a look at jobs. We look at direct and indirect and induced jobs. If anyone wants more information on that, I can talk about that later in the presentation at the end. And then we look at jobs by what types of jobs in each county. So in Grand County, you can see that accommodations, food service, and recreation are the top 3 sectors for tourism employment. Next slide. On the back of these profiles, you can see tax revenue and hotel data. If your county has enough hotel data or gets a star report, not all counties do. So this is on the second page. We look at select tourism taxes like restaurant tax, county transient room tax, and motor vehicle leasing tax over the past 5 years to look for trends. We also take a look at different types of tax revenue that's generated, looking all the way down to how much state income tax, how much local property tax are these businesses generating, these tourism businesses. We also look at shares of local to state and shares of direct to indirect and induced. And then as far as the hotel data goes, we look at a couple years to see that, how does this year look compared to last year? As you can see, 2020 is the most current data we have on for these profiles. But, just looking at the hotel occupancy from year to year, you can see these trends, these dips. One thing that we can see when we look at this is, with the pandemic, we saw that in the rural counties, this red line bounced up much faster than it did in the Wasatch Front and the urban counties. So those are just ways that we can use the data to see what's going on in each county in the state. And then we look at the average daily room rate as well over the last 2 years. Okay, next slide. And again, here's just a close-up of the data I was just talking about, so you can see it better. Okay, so I want to talk a little about the actual tourism dashboard. This is all of the data that you just saw, but is more in an interactive form. It is in the process of being updated and transferred into Tableau. Right now, it's probably not going to work for everybody the way that the format is right now. So we're just in transition, but within the next month, I'm hoping that it will be up to speed. So Denise, next slide. So what you'll be able to see with this interactive dashboard is you can search by different counties. You can see all the counties and you can see spending. I'm going to show you the spending in the dashboard, but there will also be jobs, tax revenue, and different views. So we're just going to look at the spending right here for the presentation. You can sort by counties, you can sort by year, and the data will shift and change. And the maps, the county maps, are the heat maps that show, hopefully they're going to hopefully change when you change the year, and the county, when you change the year as well. So that's kind of our goal. And then if you hover over the counties, you should be able to see the actual spending or the jobs, etc. So so next slide. Okay, and so going back to the travel and tourism and the county tourism dashboard page, we're kind of skipping around a little just because of the flow here and what I thought made sense. There's the PDFs, and then there's a statewide tourism report. This is just kind of what it looks like. This comes out once a year. I saw that somebody asked how often we update the profiles. We usually update the state report every year, maybe in like October, November, and then the profiles, usually the goal is by the end of the year, by the end of December, once a year, just because it takes time to get that information and to break it out by county. So that's a good question. Next slide. So here's just an example of what you can find in our annual statewide report. It has tons of charts and graphs at the statewide level. And then next slide. Also at the county level, we always include some county maps that show different trends. This one is, I believe, the year over change in transient room tax revenue from 2019 to 2020, which you can see Salt Lake did not fare so well. But, you know, if you look at Rich County, some of these rural Utah counties did really well during the pandemic relative to, again, some of the urban counties. So we can look at things like that. Next slide. Okay, and I just wanted to point out some new data that we've been collecting and presenting is short-term rental data. This is something that's a little bit newer to us analysts. And I wanted to point out these couple of maps because we like to show the data in different ways. So this map shows actual annual short-term rental data listings by county, and you can see Summit County, Salt Lake, and Washington have the most according to our data. And then the next slide. But then we take it a step further and we look at, okay, so that's how many listings, but how many listings are there relative to actual housing units to kind of give it some context. And suddenly you can see Grand County pops up and Kane County and Garfield and Rich County. So these are some areas where a relatively good chunk of the housing units are short-term rentals. And so these might be some hot areas to look at as far as housing shortages or affordable housing issues. Okay, and also just wanted to jump back and say again, under the travel and tourism, going back to this sort of main page, if you click the travel and tourism, you can see a list of all of our publications. And the final thing that I wanted to point out is our blogs. So every 6 to 8 weeks, I will write a tourism related blog that looks at some of the current issues. So I looked at short-term rental market growth last month, and we're just looking at different things: seasonal employee housing issues, labor shortages. The new one, which will be out in the next week or two, is going to look at sustainable travel. So we try to keep them really up to date and really recent and throw some data in there. And Denise, last slide, you can see I will incorporate data into the blogs. So, check those out if you want to, kind of stay current on things. They're a lot of fun to write. And, any questions you have, just let me know and I can hopefully point you in the right direction. So, okay, I am going to turn it over to Jonathan now.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, well, this is exciting. I get to present the media agency's perspective on this. Again, my name is Jonathan. I've been with Love Communications for over 10 years, working with the Utah Office of Tourism that entire time. And so I'm excited to walk you through some of the stuff that we cover in our monthly board meetings. Now, these monthly board meetings are available to the public, and just high level here, we cover campaign reporting, travel trends, which I'll get into a little bit. And then we also cover custom research that our agency and the state are actively building together. At the end of this, I'll show you some forecasting tools that are available to you, as well as some contact information of people you can reach out to get that information. So to start, I wanted to talk about example reporting. Now, this is a lot of words on a slide, but what I wanted to kick off was pointing out that we are looking at things like how our ADRs improving on a year-over-year basis, but more importantly, since ADRs are up, are they improving on a monthly basis? We also look at the campaigns and how well it's performing in terms of ad effectiveness, and then our top performing markets, which markets are visiting and how long they're staying for. If we go to the next slide, we'll actually look at some data that's available to us, where we're able to look at which markets are driving the highest ADRs on behalf of our destinations within the state. As you can see here, this was an example screenshot, but it was from our ski campaign, where Dallas was our top performing market. 3 years ago, Dallas was not a top 10 market for us. ADR stands for average daily rate, so it's a hotel term for how much the traveler is spending per night on a hotel room. If we go to the next slide, yeah, no problem. If we go to the next slide, well, sorry, Denise, one back. We also look at the party size. So comparing families versus couples versus individuals traveling, just to see which ones are driving higher value. And you do see that families on average, when they've been exposed to our advertising campaigns, stay about 7 days and also spend the most on hotel rooms per night. The last thing I want to talk to you about what's available in the campaign reporting is what destinations within the state are seeing hotel rooms booked as a result of some of the ad campaigns that we're running. Now, this is just example data, but this changes depending on what campaigns we have live in the time of year that we're running them. So I want to get into travel trends because I think this has been, coming out of the pandemic, this has been one of the most valuable things that the state in love has been providing our industry. And that is looking at what data is telling us and what to be prepared for. So I'm going to run you through, these are some of the data sources that we use in compiling this information. It is compiled on a monthly basis, but jumping into it, we look at Tsa Daily Throughput. And as you can see here, we have reached where we were pre-pandemic back in 2019. We're looking at 4 years of data. The red line is 2022. I think the most recent stat was about 9 million people traveled this past weekend. On the next slide, we're also looking at what the feelings and optimism are for travelers across the country. And what we are seeing right now is that there is this pessimism around the fact that we might be heading into a recession. And what we're seeing, and that number is off slightly, it's 62% of adults said they feel that the US is already in a period of contraction, with another 19% believing that the country is heading toward one. On the next slide, what we're already seeing due to inflation is that 36% of travelers have already canceled their trips. Now, these are numbers that we share on a monthly basis, and this is the highest this number has been since the beginning of the year. The other thing that is trending at the moment is gasoline prices are spiking. And you're seeing on this slide, you've got 69% of travelers saying that if gas prices don't come down, they'll be staying closer to home in their travels. So for a destination that might be on this call, this then starts to have you thinking about bringing your travel planning and the markets you're targeting to closer regional drive markets, as travelers aren't driving as far as they have in the past. We're also seeing, which is a new trend, it emerged in the pandemic, but for our OTA partners, it continues to show that about 48% of bookings or searches are for last minute trips, usually within the next 2 weeks. So that's a new trend that has remained for a while. Some things that Utah benefits from, we continue to see that people are looking to get out and enjoy nature. They're also interested in visiting new places they've never been to before. And that is something that I think we can capitalize as a state here to bring travelers in. Want to leave you with some optimism on this. We do see that about 89% of Americans still have travel plans for the next 6 months. What we are, to kind of summarize, we are seeing they're just planning to take fewer trips and they're not traveling as far as they would have if we had asked the questions 4 months ago. Another thing that we do is looking at research trends. And one of the things that is kind of, I don't want to say plaguing, but there's a lot of information out there about sustainable travelers. And a lot of the way those questions are being asked is in an aided fashion, which can create what is called a halo effect. Basically, travelers thinking of themselves in their best light. And so what we went to do was compare some of this aided research, which you'll see on this next slide, is a question that was asked by Expedia. How often, if ever, do you look for sustainable options when traveling? These could be to sustain the local environment, economy, or culture. What you'll find is that 90% of consumers are looking for sustainable options when traveling. Now, what you'll find in that previous question was that it was set up to the traveler in an aided fashion. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't looking to be sustainable, but I don't think it's 90% of travelers are actively doing that. So what we did is we ran a custom research project with the state to find out what travelers actually are doing. And so you'll see how we kind of changed this, and we didn't aid in the sustainable wording into the question. Imagine you were preparing for an overnight vacation. What are some of the things you are taking into consideration at this point in terms of planning your trip? What you'll find is out of 1,500 people surveyed, only 4 people mentioned ways to find out how to minimize their impact on the environment. And only 19 people mentioned checking in on how busy and or crowded the destination will be. So what we're finding is that it's somewhere in the middle. It's not 90% of people. It's not less than 0.04% of people, but it's somewhere in the middle, and there's a lot of work left for us to do to educate travelers before they arrive in market. The next slide, I wanted to give you guys access to our sales reps. Now, we work a lot with these sales reps on behalf of the state, and they have graciously offered, if you're looking for travel trend data, please reach out to our sales reps in the state. They'll provide you with information similar to what you'll see on this next slide. And again, this presentation will be shared after, but Todd and Josh are great contacts. Todd's with TripAdvisor, Josh is with Expedia. But if you look at this next slide that Denise has up, this is taken at any point in time of future outward looking bookings compared to where it was the year before. And so what you're seeing for the month of July, when we had pulled this report, 2022 was actually pacing behind 2019. Now, Expedia is able to pull this information for you at a county level. So please reach out to our partners. They've been amazing to the state. And with that, I'll bring it back. So thank you so much.
All right, so with that, I'm going to ask all of our panelists to come on, have a little conversation. I also just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions for specific panelists or things you would love for all the panelists to talk about, please use the Q&A function. That way we can keep track of that and pitch those questions to our audience. Denise, going to have you turn your video on if you can.
It says I can't because the host stopped it. Can you turn me on?
I'm trying.
There we go.
There we go. All right, perfect. Yeah, again, fun technology. It's always something. So actually, I want to just start quickly by asking Jennifer just a clarification question. We got a question that was in the chat that just asked, when are the county profiles updated? So I wonder if you can answer that.
Yes, they are updated usually by the end of December of each year. So annually.
Great, fantastic. So my first kind of opening question for you, something that really occurred to me, is you've covered a lot of material, right? There are many different sources of data and things people can pay attention to. And I'm curious what your perspectives are, and I'd love to hear from all of you, and feel free to share different perspectives on this. What do you think are a few of the most important things for people to pay attention to and understand about tourism trends, spending patterns in their communities, and why? And how can different people in the tourism ecosystem, so businesses and local communities, right? Lots of people in the tourism ecosystem, how can those different people use that information? Anyone willing to take a first stab at that question?
I'll take a shot at it. I think something that the state office is doing and working with partners in different communities to do is to really understand the balance of what it looks like from a stakeholder perspective, from a resident perspective, and also from a visitor perspective. And so just really being mindful to try to use the resources. And we did share that resident sentiment information with our different partners around the state. And if you're interested in seeing some of that information and you haven't seen it yet, I'm happy to share that. And so I could put my email in the chat. But understanding how residents are feeling, and then what the visitor is experiencing in your area, and also what's important to the stakeholders. And I think those things go without saying, but I think that just understanding that balance is very important.
Yeah, and I just, as far as, my part here, I would just say that it's really, I think, important to understand that in travel and tourism, there's a lot of economic impact. So because I think 80+% of our visitors are from out of state, or they're not local to our county or community, that creates an economic impact. Where in a lot of industries, it's just residents spending money in that industry in the same area where they live, which is not considered an economic impact. So I think just kind of understanding this, some of this benefits of tourism in that way, and being able to communicate, oh, look, it creates jobs and tax revenue, because, that's outside money creating tax revenue for Utah residents. So just being able to learn a little bit about economics, and I'm always, willing to help explain things the best I can to communicate that, can give you a little bit more, I think, a little more power.
And I'd say to add to what Jennifer and Denise are saying, the great thing about where we are now is a lot of where we're at there's data in the past that can help mirror maybe some of the decisions that we should be making. You know, when COVID started, we actually looked at the 2008 recession as a proxy for what might happen in travel and use that to guide some of our decisions and moving forward. And what we're finding now, and some of the travel trends that I shared there, that's about 5 slides of what is typically a 40-page report that we share at the monthly board meetings. We're trying to be future outward thinking at a broad level that we do think works on a community level as well, because it does have trends that will reflect what is likely heading in our local community's direction.
Excellent. Thank you all for taking that question. I want to ask a few simple questions or more straightforward questions from the audience, and then I'm going to dive into another kind of meaty question. So just a first question, which anybody has information on this, I'd love your response. There was a question of, do you track BLM visitation, or do we have any information? Maybe I just say sort of, you know, generally with public lands, what kind of information we have in addition to what's already been talked about.
Yeah, we're not tracking BLM visitation currently. There's a lot of BLM land in Utah, and I know that there are certain areas that do have boots on the ground, people doing some counting and visitation analysis. It's something that we need to look into a little bit more. I think it would be great. We have geolocation information that we're watching, and so if there's a certain area that exists on BLM land, we might wrap what's called a geofence or a polygon around that particular area, and then we're able to see mobile devices, quantities of devices that might be visiting those places, but we don't have all of the BLM land wrapped like that.
Although I do want to point out, we do give a report for Grand Staircase from the BLM where they do track a certain sites and where they have counters, and we do compare that from year to year. So we kind of get a gist of what's going on there. I haven't seen anything like that for Bears Ears. But yeah, but Denise is right. Like some of that is just tricky to get.
So another question about sources of data. There was a question about whether Strava Metro data is used in Office of Tourism data analysis, or just anything about Strava data that you all can contribute.
Yeah, we have not used Strava data. At one point a few years ago, we talked about whether or not to try to begin to use some of that in some of our analyses. And at the time, it was felt that a lot of that data would be coming from residents themselves and not necessarily visitors who turn on their Strava when they're visiting. That may not be the case, actually. I mean, we should probably look into that, but we haven't played around with any Strava data in our analyses.
Okay, and then question for Jennifer in particular, although if anyone else wants to add to this, please do. Jennifer, the question is, you showed 2020 short-term rental inventory by county. And the question is, where is the Gardner Center getting this data from, and how, or the Institute getting this data from, and do you have 2021 numbers?
Right, so I am getting this from a company called Transparent. In the past, we've used AirDNA. So these are just different firms that scrape data off of these short-term rental platforms. And so Denise and I have access to that, and they do update, I believe, is it monthly, Denise? So we may have up to maybe
every other month.
That's right. Yeah, every other month. So maybe we have up to April or May for 2022. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, and then I'm going to leverage this next question to lead into mine. So there was a question via the Q&A about what sustainable travel means, and I'm just going to kind of talk about what does sustainable travel, sustainable tourism mean, what does it mean to you all when you talk about it, and building on that, this is a topic that's come up in a lot of our sessions, and I'm curious to hear more from you all about how do you measure sustainability, what are we looking for, how can we get information on that? What is the state and others already doing to try to get information on that? Just generally that topic of sustainable travel, sustainable tourism, what does it mean? How do we measure it? How do we use that information?
Well, Jonathan and I just attended a conference, TTRA's conference in Victoria, and the conference is called Regenerative Tourism. I think there's a lot of different terminology out there, and it's a difficult word to define. And I think it's also a difficult thing to measure, whether or not you're being successful. And sometimes I hear the words perpetual tourism economy, but I think for me, it means leaving our assets in a way that lets future generations be able to also enjoy them, and traveling in a way that's respectful to the cultures and to the places and the people in the communities. Jonathan, Jennifer, you might have a different way that you think about it.
No, I think you nailed it on the head. It's a term that is thrown around widely in the industry, and one that is so broadly used. In the case of what we're doing for our ad campaigns, sustainable travel reflects getting someone who's going to stay here longer than 1 night, longer than 2 nights, because we know the environmental impact of that 1 night traveler it's more cost to the hotel. More resources are used in that 1 night than if they stayed for 3 nights. So getting the length of stay to increase. Denise mentioned educating travelers before they arrive in market. That's something Utah's pioneering. We've been dedicating a percentage of our funds to educating travelers before they arrive into our community, so that they know how to be a better traveler in market. And so to us, that's kind of part of what sustainable travel means on a broad basis.
Yeah, I think that's great, Denise and Jonathan, because it's super hard to define. I think personally, I think of it as leaving the place you visit a little bit more improved or better than when you came, or the way you found it, and learning about the local wildlife, learning about the local economy, trying to shop locally, just being very mindful when you travel. I know that I attended a webinar with some individuals that are at the forefront of sustainable travel. And, they're even talking about things about eventually measuring, water usage by, hotel water usage, or carbon footprints of how each traveler got to the destination. And like one day taking it to that next level and having something measurable. But, it's a ways out, I think, as far as that goes.
I'll just add too that our office, our Forever Mighty initiative launched in 2019, and with this resident sentiment analysis, we did do some baseline branding understanding and what people knew about Forever Mighty and some of the initiatives within Forever Mighty. And so we feel like anything we can do to try to measure how we're doing is a step in the right direction. And so we are continuing to follow on those questions that align with our Forever Mighty initiatives, and we'll be watching those over time. So that'll be interesting to follow. And then one other thing that we did that I think is really cool and interesting, and we followed using some advertising effectiveness research that we do, was with our Forever Mighty initiative being more prevalent. We took last spring and summer's campaign, and we had an inspirational Southern Utah campaign running. And then for those people who had seen that messaging, or who we knew were intending to travel, or who had already planned a trip here, Jonathan mentioned that we've been serving them ads so that they're prepared when they do come. And then when we evaluated those campaigns aligned together, what we saw was that a lot of the attributes that we're watching for communication and how people recognize this or perceive the state was that Forever Mighty layer on top of the general campaign layer really boosted people's perceptions about the state and the communications that were intended in general. And so it was really positive and encouraging for us.
Any other thoughts on this? How to measure it, how to keep track of it, or what we maybe should be paying attention to, or what you'd advise communities and others in the tourism industry pay attention to? All right, everyone said their piece. I do want to note that in the chat, there's just a comment that Strava Metro is apparently now free. So you no longer have to get a license through UDOT or otherwise. So just a note to the audience that that could be a source of data even for you all to use if that is the case. And then Jennifer, there was a clarifying follow-up in the Q&A just about talking about the short-term rental data, that the 2020 numbers went up 21%. Wondering if the 2021 percentages are different. So again, I don't know if you have information on that, totally fine if you don't, but that was a clarification.
Oh, is that the housing inventory for the short-term rental housing? Yeah. That was a 21% share, I believe, of housing units. So 21% of housing units, I believe, is what that was referring to, not necessarily, not a year-over-year change.
Okay, perfect. And don't know if you know anything about the 2021 percentages.
So, yeah, I mean, the percentages, I don't know, Denise, do you know anything about the kind of an overall short-term rental?
Yeah, I was just trying to look as we're talking. There was, I'm going to put this article in the chat.
Wonderful.
There's been a couple recent articles about short-term rentals and outsized shares in different counties. This is 2021 information that I just put in there. And so you can find a little bit in there. It is something, the data that we get from Transparent is a little bit dirty. And so we do, you know, each time we're using it, we have to kind of go through a process and clean and make sure that we're looking at it correctly. But it is something on our radar that we are interested in paying more and more attention to. I did see nationwide that May over May 2019, short-term rentals in the U.S. are up 26% over May from 2019, whereas traditional lodging is down 2%. Now that's a U.S. number, and I don't have that information for you today about what Utah specifically looks like. But the Gardner Policy Institute has been really great at looking at some of the inventory information on our behalf and on others' behalf as well around the state. And so we're trying to be better about using that information, and we know it's important to communities and increasingly more so. So we're paying attention to it.
Yeah, and if you have a specific question to your county, for example, you know, you want to look at the last few months of 2022 versus 2021 or something like that for your county, I'm happy to help with that anytime. So
I appreciate the generous offers of our panelists to help in different ways, and even just sharing the different sources of data that already exist that folks can tap into. I'm going to ask maybe just one more question from the audience before I start to wrap us up. And this question just circles back to the sustainable travel question. The question was, in regards to sustainable travel, is there any focus to reach out to businesses and encourage them to look at their own sustainability, less disposable single-use items, et cetera? And I'm guessing, Denise, that's a question kind of predominantly to the state.
Yeah, well, we have a destination development and management team. I think maybe a lot of you know Bianca and Selena and Flint, who have also presented in the Resilience series, I believe. And they're working with different communities. Honestly, it's not an office initiative to try to reduce individual plastic waste and that sort of thing. But part of the Forever Mighty initiatives do, encourage and principles encourage, responsible travel. And we did have some messaging. Jonathan, you might remember better about what the TripAdvisor messaging was that ran, or that's still running, I think, through August. For people, it's targeted to people who are actually here in market visiting. And there are a lot of messages. I'll let you talk about it. But.
Yeah, it covers everything from staying on the trail to actually not using single-use plastics and carrying in a water bottle, especially if you're in Southern Utah, shopping locally. It's really trying to go into the Forever Mighty ethos that Denise has talked about, and provide travelers with information on why it benefits the community so much when you follow these things.
Wonderful. Thank you all for that. And I will use that as an opportunity to push our next session, which is going to be Flint Timmons talking about many of the things the Office of Tourism is doing. And I suspect we will get into this topic. I'll say a little bit more about that when we wrap up. For now, just one final question to our panelists. I'm curious to hear from you all. What is just one final nugget of wisdom or an actionable takeaway you want to leave our audience with? You can reinforce something you already said if you want to drive that home, or if there's something new you want to add that you haven't had a chance to say. If you need a moment to think about it, feel free to take that.
I think if there's something I could leave the community with, and that'd be the monthly board meetings are very important. They provide a lot of information, and what we are seeing right now is that travelers are looking at more regional trips than ever before. Costs are up, and so I do think it's not a time for panic, but we have to be realistic about how far travelers are going to be willing to travel in the current circumstances.
I will just say that I actually reinforcing something that Denise said earlier, but I started this job almost 10 years ago. And when I started, there was very little information available, very little data. And so now we have so much. And I just really want to reinforce, use the data, it's there. We're all here to help you, and definitely take advantage of it.
I just want to echo what you said, Jennifer. I don't ever turn anyone away when they send me an email or call me and ask me to help them understand information or where to find information. And so please reach out. Please, if you have any questions at all, sophisticated or unsophisticated with data use, anything's on the table, and I'm always happy to point you in the right direction. So that would be my number one.
Thank you to our speakers for your suggestions, advice, and inspiration. My key takeaway is that these speakers are an amazing resource, as are their programs, organizations, and again, there's a lot of data out there for everyone that I hope folks will tap into. I'm going to wrap us up. So speakers, I invite you to turn off your videos so you don't have to sit there awkwardly while we do just a little wrap up. I want to turn back to our audience briefly before we wrap up, and just really want to hear from you all of our live participants, what you're taking away from this session. So we're going to do that again via the chat. I'm going to put a prompt into the chat. You know the drill, type your response into the chat. Make sure your chats are going to everyone so everyone can see your response. So again, just question to the audience, would really love to hear, what is one thing you're taking away from this session? So take a moment, think about that. When you're ready, type your response into chat. There are a lot more people on this call than were responding previously, so hopefully we'll hear from more of you. Give you about 20 more seconds to get some responses in there. I know it takes a little time to type. Seeing people just identifying additional data sources, that there's a lot more data out there than maybe you think. You just need to go out and look for it or know where to look. Seeing a lot of appreciation for these different data sources. Power of data, right, can really help us understand what's happening or what might come down the pipeline. Can give you just about 10 more seconds to get a few more thoughts in there. All right, thank you to the members of our audience who participated. Again, we love to hear from you, know what you're taking away, what you're interested in. We do hope that everyone gained a lot of insight from this webinar, take away some concrete ideas for how to better understand travel patterns, spending patterns in your community. Just want to remind everyone that this webinar is recorded. It will be available on our website for future viewing. So if you found it helpful, please share it with others. Feel free to obviously rewatch it. Spread the word about this session, our previous sessions, which are also recorded, our future sessions. And again, just so it's there readily accessible for you, is the link in the chat to our website. We hope to see many of you at our upcoming sessions. The next session will be on August 2nd from 12 to 1 o'clock Mountain Time. And that session, as I previously alluded to, will be a primer on the Utah Office of Tourism, its programs, and its resources. So really encourage those of you, especially here in Utah, to check that out. As you are hopefully already getting a sense, the Office of Tourism is a wonderful resource for the tourism industry throughout the state. Others from elsewhere might be able to learn from that as well. You can learn more about that session and register on our training series website. So check out that link I put in the chat. And again, just a reminder that you can access the past sessions and those recordings on that website as well. We really want your feedback to help us make sure that our future sessions really meet your needs. So please look for an automatic survey that will be sent to your email as soon as this session concludes. It should take you just a minute or two to complete. It is very short, and your doing so will really help us make sure that we are meeting the needs of tourism businesses and other organizations across the state. So with that, a final thank you to our panelists, to our audience. And again, we hope to see you at our next training session on August 2nd. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.